Hello. Welcome to my tier ranking list for Final Fantasy XIV. In this video, we are going to be putting the jobs together in ranks, fighting game style. While this list truly is my opinion of how the jobs should be ranked, it is my opinion and shouldn't be taken as the gospel. I'm always up for discussion in the comments section as I enjoy debating these kinds of things. Finally, 14 is not a fighting game and this kind of ranking isn't perfect. However, I think this is good fun to have anyway. There is no truly utterly weak job in this game and all of them can clear content. The balance right now is probably better than it ever has been in this game's history. But some jobs do have clear weaknesses or strengths that make them less or more desirable in a party, and I just want to elaborate on these things. While it is late in the expansion, I think there's no better time than to talk about this, since all jobs have received their final buffs. Now that we've talked about everything, let's dive into this list. Now we're entering the S tier of jobs. These are the jobs that begin to fall into the undisputed jobs that everyone generally wants in their party and sometimes can't live without. They aren't flawless, but they may as well as be because of how good their pros are. First off, we have the ninja. No one expected any less from this job, as ninja has been strong its whole existence in Final Fantasy XIV. Honestly, let's get straight to the point with ninja. Trick Attack is the biggest song to sing here. Trick Attack is a 10% vulnerability up debuff that lasts for 10 seconds. It also has a very low and convenient cooldown of 60 seconds, meaning it lines up with at least most jobs' damage cooldowns and burst every time it is applied. This damage buff is quite frankly the best in the game. Its synergy with a multitude of jobs is what a lot of people would say is unfair. However, I don't think that Trick Attack is unfair, as the team at Square Enix has made interesting ways to reduce the effectiveness of this job. In Heavensward, Ninja's domination was completely unrivaled. It had so many utilities that people absolutely relied on to do their optimal damage. Whole rotations revolved around Ninja's existence in a party. The tanks needed Shadewalker for increased aggro or they found themselves doing lower damage openers and rotations. Healers and other DPS jobs really valued Smokescreen, especially those jobs that did not have quelling strikes available, or those jobs who didn't care to level Bard. Ninja had Goad exclusively, a skill highly valued to physical damage dealers in a time where TP wasn't insanely costly, but in fights like A9S, the physical damage dealers had serious resource issues with no other regenerative options. At times, the paladin legitimately would have no choice but to wait for TP to regenerate without a ninja in a party. So as you can see, before we even get to Trick Attack, Ninja was already seeming to be the pillar of the party. As you go into Trick Attack, the reliance that every job had for this skill in Heavensward was so unbelievable that it was practically all-powerful. Correct me in the comments if I am wrong, but every single job other than perhaps Warrior had a burst with cooldowns that had a multiple of 60 seconds. No other utility at the time other than Disembowel was competing with Trick Attack's ridiculous synergy. Ninja was revered as the god ruler king, and everyone wanted one. So why is it that in Stormblood, Ninja is strong, but not as strong as to be in the SS tier with the jobs I find completely broken? Well, SE did an excellent and sneaky job of nerfing Ninja without touching Ninja's utility at all. For starters, the most blatant change was adding Goad to Crossroll. A complete rip from Ninja's tools, but it is no big deal, as that wasn't exactly Ninja's strongest tool anyway. Next, they added diversion to all DPS jobs except the ranged physical DPS. While initially diversion was pretty pathetic, they buffed the ever-loving hell out of it, making it so that Shadewalker was not 100% necessary to keep Samurai and Monk from ripping hate from a DPS stance tank. Also, the ranged and caster DPS received Refresh and Lucid Dreaming respectively, halving their enmity at the touch of a button. Both instances are a indirect nerf to both Shadewalker and Smokescreen. So 3 out of 4 of Ninja's abilities have become absolutely optional and not really a big factor to Ninja's raid DPS contribution. Now in Stormblood it purely relies on Trick Attack to make a name for itself. However, even Trick Attack has received an indirect nerf. This was honestly what I think was the true genius of the dev team. Instead of listening to the screeching of players saying to nerf trick, SC did them one better. They made it so that a multitude of jobs have burst outside of the 60-second window. Some jobs have a 45-second window, 60-second window, a 90-second window, an 80-second window, or even a combination of the three I just provided. They made it so jobs didn't absolutely rely on trick. They also made it so that some burst isn't just exclusive to trick's 10-second window, but extended past it, lasting longer than the trick window itself. So if most jobs don't really rely on Ninja for their damage window, why is Ninja an S tier, you might ask? Well, don't be silly, the synergy with trick is still there and is unbelievably high. The fact that it exists every 60 seconds means that everyone is constantly doing at least something in it, and generally can regularly pop some kind of cooldown within that window to optimize in it. Even with its reduced effectiveness, trick still provides somewhere from 1000 raid DPS and higher when used properly. Its constant frequency and high value is just too good to pass up for most jobs, even though their kits don't completely revolve around it. That is really just how strong trick attack is. Ninja is still the absolute lowest DPS in the game, or at least close to it, which is fair for having the strongest raid buff that can be provided. Ninja was basically so strong that every other job had to be designed around its buff so that Ninja wouldn't be broken anymore. Now, Ninja is really just a properly balanced job as it should be, but there isn't a single job that wouldn't take a Ninja in their party. So does Ninja have any cons? Well, yes, it doesn't, quite a few. Trick attack doesn't always play well with fight mechanics. Being a buff that is so frequent and also requiring a rear positional, it may just be that it cannot always be put up to its full effectiveness compared to some other buffs that can be applied at the push of a button. Also, many Ninja players tend to struggle with the constant application of the buff because of improper Mudra management. If ninjutsu is used improperly, it can lead to trick attack drift, leading to trick attack completely missing burst windows. However, that is more player error and shouldn't really be placed on the job. TCJ is a new skill addition added to Stormblood and, in my opinion, is a skill that stands against everything Ninja stands for by locking you in place for about 4 seconds. This skill is actually even worse than ley lines, because if you move you completely lose the ability. The Ninki gauge Ninja has is controlled by auto attacks instead of the user. This isn't entirely awful, but can lead to some wonkier situations with Ninja's rotations, and things having no ability to line up the way they might have in a previous pull. Obviously, most of Ninja's cons are really just gripes I have with it that don't make the job weak, but they just upset me. Ninja is still an extremely strong job and borderline mandatory in optimization. Next is the absolute berserker, that is, Warrior. Warrior is the go-to chat that almost everyone wants in their party, no matter what other tank there is. It brings so much power both offensively and defensively that its existence can simply make running content easier. Its defensive cooldowns are strong, having Vengeance on an understandable 120-second cooldown that provides 30% mitigation for 15 seconds. This also doubles as a DPS ability, as every physical attack you take delivers a counter attack to the opponent. Warrior has Raw Intuition, an ability that allows a 100% parry rate as long as you are being hit from the front. If hit from any other direction, the warrior will take critical damage. However, this can be negated with a cross-roll skill Awareness. Warrior has Shake It Off to shield the party from damage, and the warrior can use its own personal cooldowns to increase the strength of this shield even further. Warrior has the ridiculously good ability, Holmgang. Holmgang binds the warrior into place, but enables the warrior's HP to never fall below 1. Couple this with the fact that this is on an incredibly low cooldown for an invulnerability skill, 180 seconds. It is used in much content to completely abuse tank busters or other mechanics multiple times over. So bringing a war can allow content to be somewhat cheesable depending on the fight. Warrior has Inner Beast, a gauge skill that allows the warrior to take 20% less damage for 6 seconds. It doesn't stack, but can be used multiple times to refresh the buff, and this skill also self-heals. And after all that, Warrior also has a free OG CD self-heal in Equilibrium, because everything else wasn't enough. Offensively, Warrior is just as stacked as it is defensively. Warrior brings a slashing debuff, which is always good to have, but Warrior also applies it faster than any other slashing job. Outside of that, Warrior doesn't provide much for the party DPS wise. None of the tanks do, however. What Warrior brings is its gigantic dick to the table. It by far does the most damage of all the tanks. Most of Warrior's damage comes from the ridiculousness that is Ffxiv. At 520 potency it is a very hard hitting skill, especially for a tank. Warrior also has Upheaval, an OGCD that is 300 potency, but its potency is directly affected by how much HP you currently have. Considering Warrior has Defiance, Thrill of Battle, and Unchained, the potency of this move can be seriously increased. Unchained negates the damage penalty from using Defiance, Warrior's tank stats, and further increases the damage dealt by Upheaval. It has Onslaught, a gap closer, which also increases enmity and deals damage. And finally, we reach the skill that makes Warrior absolutely ridiculous and unreasonably powerful, Inner Release. Inner Release allows the Warrior to negate all gauge cost and allows every single source of damage deal direct critical hits for 10 seconds. This allows up to the spamming of 5 Ffxivs, a gauge-free Upheaval, and a gauge-free Onslaught that all direct crit for free, allowing Warrior's Burst to compete with actual DPS burst for that short period of time. You take all these things that Warrior provides, and you struggle to find any flaws. Honestly, I'm struggling too. If I were to give Warriors any cons or criticisms, it is that its damage and rotation is too focused on that 10-second window that is Inner Release. It is incredibly boring outside of that. Finishing fights outside of that window can really make or break a Warrior's damage. Perhaps the truly biggest downside is that Defiance does not provide instant mitigation like the other two tanks' tank stances. Defiance can increase the maximum HP of the Warrior, but it doesn't heal for the HP gained, making it somewhat of an ineffective tank stance initially. If Defiance has any gain over any other tank stance, however, it is that it is an OGCD, so you don't lose much damage going into the stance. Warrior is a complete S tier job and is never turned away from any party. It is quite simply next to perfection. Looking at Bard, I really struggle trying to find where I'd place it. Bard is an absolute monster of a job right now. You could say it is broken if you really wanted to go there. Its endless kit of utilities just makes Bard a truly insane job right now. It eventually came down to the fact that, if it wasn't for Bard's heavy reliance on Dragoon, Bard would easily be S tier. So while I rank this job as an S tier for the sake of this video, Bard with a Dragoon is quite frankly one of the best jobs in the games, hands down. Since we're already on the topic, we may as well explain briefly why Bard has potential SS tier capabilities with just Dragoon alone in the party. For starters, Dragoon is the only job that is capable of placing the resistance down debuff for piercing. Bard has piercing damage, and when a whole job was created with the idea of 5% of its damage not being accounted for, you all of a sudden add disembowel, and now Bard is doing 5% more damage than it should be. This debuff alone would probably be enough to propel Bard into SS tier, but the synergies don't even stop there. Bard's whole kit revolves around critical hit chance and procs. The more critical hits you have with your dots, the more you build more repertoire, the more bloodletters you get, and the more stacks in PN you can achieve. You then take the Dragoon and add its battle litany to that kit, an AoE critical hit chance up buff, and now Bard does a monumental amount of damage because of all the crits it is getting. Battle Litany also lines up with Battle Voice, and while Bard doesn't get this buff personally, a crit buff lining up with a direct hit buff can lead to nothing but stupidly high numbers. That synergy doesn't even stop there. Take into account that Bard is capable of doing really high burst, provided its procs cooperate, it is usually a strong candidate for Dragon Sight. So in essence, Bard's whole existence depends on the presence of a Dragoon. When you take the Dragoon away from Bard, which you'd be surprised doesn't happen very often, Bard is actually pretty balanced, I'd say, and falls back into S tier. Regardless of whatever the Bard is doing, you'd still always want them in your party. Their kit is pretty much unrivaled utility for not just damage, but also supportive skills. Starting with the damage utility, whenever a Bard uses any one of their 3 songs, It provides a passive crit buff to the whole party. While it's not a large crit buff at only 3%, as long as the bard is hitting something, this buff will be up all the time. While the bard doesn't receive this buff, its constant uptime makes it incredibly powerful for the rest of the party members. Foe's Requiem is another strong buff in the bard's arsenal. It's a 3% damage up debuff placed on all enemies within 20 yards of the bard. The length at which it lasts depends on how you use it with other buffs, but it generally lasts a little less than 20 seconds. While it is on a 180 second cooldown, it still has excellent synergy with big burst periods that generally happen around the 3-minute mark anyway, making it as strong as really ever needs to be. So Bard on the damage front is covered, but the utilities do not stop there. Looking at the defensive buffs, Bard has the Warden's Paean. This is essentially an instant cast Asuna on a low cooldown. What sets this apart from Asuna is that it has the unique property of placing a shield on the target, nullifying any further debuffs that could be placed on the target that would also be removable by Asuna as well. Bard provides the buff Nature's Mini, which is essentially a targetable convalescence. Very good for when a scholar wants to do something like an add low deploy or when a target needs heavy healing. Finally, Bard has access to the powerful skill Troubadour. It has many effects that activate based on what song the Bard is currently in. In Mage's Ballad, you obtain an increase to the max HP for all party members. In Wander's Minuet, you gain a magic defense buff for the whole party. And in Army's Paean, you gain a physical defense buff for the whole party. All of these are extremely useful, and while it's not as flexible as the Machinist's Dismantle, it is not a weak cooldown in any sense, having a use for all kinds of mechanics. So on the utility side of things, Bard is pretty much already one of the most powerful jobs offensively and defensively. Bard has some incredibly high potential when it comes to personal DPS output. With crit rates on the rise throughout the expansion, Bard could only get stronger. Bard is still on the lower side personally, being about the third lowest DPS in the game. But that doesn't change the fact that it does way more damage than it should be doing. Bard also has the ability to be constantly on the move, decreasing how affected it is by mechanics that are happening. The design of Bard is actually a thing of absolute beauty. It is probably the best job they've ever designed, and it is so much fun to play. Bard is always actively doing something, with the only phase of Bard being a little lackluster as the Army's Paean phase, but even that phase is somewhat cool to have, increasing the pace of your GCD. The heavily RNG based proc system can at times leave you a bit wanting, but normally it is still fun enough to have to deal with. Honestly, the RNG system of Bard is truly the only flaw it has, if you really want to call it a flaw. With how high crit rates are these days, it's generally not a problem, but it can lead to plenty of unfavorable situations, such as not being able to barrage your effulgent proc or not getting enough procs to use on pitch perfect. These things can happen often, which is generally unfavorable, but Bard has plenty of workarounds for these things, so you're not completely screwed. All in all, Bard is pretty much a work of perfection, perhaps a little too perfect, and with the right conditions, it can be an unbeatable party member. The Astrologian is in an interesting spot for ranking. Similarly to Bard, while it is incredibly strong when paired with another job, in this case the Scholar, Astro becomes probably the most unfair job in this game. Astro and Scholar have some ridiculous synergy together. With their teamwork, for the Scholar, it is business as usual, but in the case of Astro, it gets such a monumental DPS gain from just the Scholar existing. However, if you take the Scholar away from Astro, it can't perform quite as efficiently. It is still a powerful choice no matter what combo of healers you take. Astro has the ability to be a flexible healer. It has two stances that change the properties of a variety of its GCD heals from regens to shields. It is quite strong in both stances, with its regens being very good and MP efficient as you'd expect. Its shields are exceptionally good, debatably being better than the Scholars on average. Because of these two stances, Astro has no problems working with either two healers ever. But truthfully, these are not the main pros that Astro really brings. To get into the meat of Astro, Astro has a system of RNG of buffs provided by the ability to pull out one of 6 cards. While I don't want to get too in depth in how Astro manages these cards, as this would probably turn into a crazy guide video trying to explain it, I'll do my best to explain how they work. The first two cards Astro can provide are the Spire and the Year. These are TP and MP regen buffs respectively. While the Year definitely is pretty great for healers, the Spire is pretty pathetic, since generally no one ever needs TP unless they've died multiple times over. The next two cards are the Bowl and the Balance. These two cards are relatively simple. The Bowl is a powerful defensive buff and the Balance is a powerful damage buff. The final two cards are the Spear and the Arrow. The Spear is a crit buff and the Arrow is an attack speed buff. The Astro has a buff for just about everyone. Not only are these cards already quite strong, but the manipulation of these cards are truly the scary part of the Astro. Generally, the cards that are very good last about 30 seconds standard. That alone is already pretty intense. However, if the Astro really likes you, and with the proper card RNG, they can make the card last up to a whopping 60 seconds on one target. They can increase the effectiveness of a card to make it even stronger over 30 seconds. They can even half the potency of the card, and spread it to the whole party, and it will still last 30 long seconds. The time manipulation doesn't even stop there. With the usage of Celestial Opposition, the Astro can extend any buff it's placed on itself or any party member near them for 10 more seconds. Not only is that pretty incredible for its cards, but this means you could also increase things like regens, shields, and even eye for an eye. Literally any buff that the Astro has access to that can be placed on a party member can be extended. And if you want to go the extra mile, you can use the single target variant, Time Dilation. This extends one party member's buff durations by 15 seconds. There's so many possibilities with how Astro can manipulate its buffs, that I feel like anyone who plays this class honestly has the biggest brain out of all of us. The card system alone is enough to make Astro pretty damn buff compared to its other healers, but its power doesn't even stop there. We haven't even gone into the powerful healing kit of the Astro yet. Let's start with one of Astro's already pretty crazy abilities. Essential Dignity is initially a 400 potency heal ability with a cooldown of 40 seconds. That doesn't sound too incredible, until you realize that Essential Dignity scales with HP. The lower your HP is, the more potency it gains. And at 1 HP, Essential Dignity will reach a daunting 1000 potency. While it's not quite Benediction, it's pretty much close enough to do most of the job. This skill is excellent for moves like Living Dead and Holmgang, and has the benefit of having a much shorter cooldown than Benediction, making it more flexible and more useful. And if that wasn't enough for you, every usage of Essential Dignity decreases the recast time of Light Speed by 10 seconds. Light Speed is a buff that reduces the cast time of any GCD by 2.5 seconds, and halves all MP cost by 50%. This skill pretty much makes everything you cast instant, with the exceptions really being Gravity and Ascend. They still have 2.5 seconds cut off their cast time, however, which, at least for Gravity, is more than enough. The halving of MP cost is also great, as the Astro does struggle a bit with MP compared to the other two healers. Collective Unconscious is probably Astro's most powerful mitigative tool, along with the regen it applies. Collective is a bubble skill that reduces damage taken by 10% and applies a hefty regen that cures for 150 potency for 15 seconds. You could say the weakness of this skill is that it cancels upon using any other action or attempting to move, but you don't need to stay locked in the skill for very long, as the defense buff remains for about 6 seconds after cancelling the bubble, and the regen reapplies on party members every 3 seconds as long as the bubble is up anyway. This ability pretty much blows the White Mage's Asylum out of the water with proper setup for it. Finally, you have the strongest healing ability in Astro's kit. Earthly Star is an interesting ability, where you can place down a star on the field, and depending on how long it stays out will increase the potency of its heal. This is a great skill when used with proper preparation, as when it stayed past a duration of 10 seconds, its heal potency is increased to a seriously high 720 potency AoE heal, as long as everyone is within the star's range. Not only is this a better cure 3, with a better range, but it also deals 200 potency worth of damage in an AoE. All off of the GCD. People may make the case that Cure 3 is better because it's always available, but with proper knowledge of a fight, Earthly Star nullifies that advantage several times over. You can use this as an AoE heal, as a single target heal, or even just for pure damage. So then you look at Astro, and then wonder how it handles all these OGCDs. You'd be right to think it must clip everything, but actually Astro doesn't clip a single GCD. Before, this used to be a problem, but ever since they lowered the cast time of Malefic 3, Astro never had to worry about clipping again, and this propelled Astro into being tied for being the top DPS healer. This simple change for changing the cast time of a handful of skills made Astro extremely broken. It's unfortunate that White Mage has to compete with a job like this. Astro pretty much has an answer to everything White Mage has except for the White Mage's impressive MP regeneration. And then you take that and add Astro's card system on top of that and White Mage just can't compete. And this isn't even the most broken healer somehow. This is how bad healer balance is right now, and hopefully with the coming of Shadowbringers these things will be addressed. Astro is an incredible job to have in your party, and everyone will be clamoring to have this job always, no matter what job they play. Thank you for watching the video. I really appreciate everyone for watching. If you have any points you want to make, please comment down below. I enjoy chatting about this game. Don't forget to like the video, and if you really enjoyed it, please subscribe.